I watched the helicopter descend toward platform Delta 7, its rotors battling the steady Gulf winds. 5 years on this rig had trained me to spot the nervous energy of new arrivals even from a distance. The chopper touched down with a slight bounce, and I adjusted my hard hat against the rotor wash. 3 figures climbed out, hunching under the spinning blades. Fresh meat. I'd seen plenty come and go, some leaving in helicopters like this one, others leaving in ways nobody wanted to talk about. The pilot gave me a knowing nod as I approached. He'd been making this run for years, delivering newcomers who never quite understood what they were walking into. "Marcus Rodriguez," I said, raising my voice over the engine noise as I extended my hand to the first guy. Young, probably mid-20s, with an eager grin that hadn't been weathered away yet. "Safety coordinator." "Tyler Brooks," he shouted back, his handshake enthusiastic. "First, offshore assignment." He pulled out his phone and immediately snapped a photo of the platform stretching out behind me. "This view is killer." Poor choice of words. The second man stepped forward without waiting for an introduction. Kevin Miller worked 3 rigs before this one. His handshake was deliberately firm, the kind meant to establish dominance. I'd seen his type before. Thought they knew everything because they'd worked a few standard operations. The third hung back, eyes fixed somewhere near my boots. "Daniel Walsh," he said when I approached, his voice barely audible over the helicopter. His hand was cold when I shook it, his grip limp. Something about his pale eyes made the back of my neck prickle. I gestured for them to follow me as the helicopter lifted off. "Let's get you 3 situated. Gear storage is below. Personal quarters are in the west wing. Orientation starts in 30. Tyler kept taking photos as we walked, capturing the rusted metal catwalks and the endless expanse of water. Kevin surveyed everything with naked skepticism, while Daniel trailed behind, moving with careful, measured steps. "How long you been out here?" Tyler asked, falling into step beside me. 5 years on Delta 7. Kevin snorted. 5 years on the same rig? Must not have much ambition. I let that slide. He'd understand soon enough why some of us stayed. Someone had to be here who knew the rules. I led them to the break room, a cramped space with metal tables bolted to the floor and the permanent smell of burnt coffee. The room was empty. The day crew was mid-shift. "Take a seat," I said, pulling a laminated sheet from my clipboard. The paper was worn at the edges from being handed to dozens of newcomers before them. Some had listened, some hadn't. They sat, Tyler still scrolling through his photos, Kevin leaning back with his arms crossed, Daniel perched at the edge of his chair like he might bolt at any moment. "Before Captain Peterson gives you the standard orientation, there are some specific rules for Delta 7 you need to know." I placed the sheet on the table. These aren't corporate guidelines or suggestions. They're survival instructions. That got their attention, even Kevin's. Rule 1. Never approach the eastern side of the rig after sunset. I pointed in the direction they'd need to avoid. Not for a smoke break, not for a better view, not because you dropped something. The eastern side is off limits once the sun goes down. Tyler's grin faltered slightly, but didn't disappear. Kevin rolled his eyes. Rule 2. During hurricanes, you stay inside the designated shelter areas. No matter what you hear outside, no matter who you think is calling for help, you stay inside until all clear is given. "What exactly would we hear?" Tyler asked, his tone suggesting he thought this was some kind of hazing ritual. "Hopefully nothing," I answered. Rule 3. Trust your instincts about other crew members. If someone's behavior seems wrong, even someone you've worked with for months, report it immediately. Kevin leaned forward. "Report what exactly?" "Changes in behavior, unusual interests, anything that feels off." "Feels off," Kevin repeated flatly. "Very scientific." Rule 4, I continued, ignoring him. Always follow your gut feelings. If something tells you not to go somewhere or do something, listen to that voice. I looked at each of them in turn, trying to gauge if any of this was sinking in. These rules weren't written by corporate. They were written by the people who've survived here. Tyler laughed, the sound too loud in the small room. This sounds like horror movie stuff. What's next? Don't say Bloody Mary in the bathroom mirror. You think this is a joke? I asked, keeping my voice level. Every rule on this sheet exists because someone died learning it was necessary. Come on, Kevin said. These are just superstitions old-timers use to mess with newcomers. I've worked storms before. I know how to handle myself. This rig is different, I said. Different how? Tyler asked, curiosity replacing some of his amusement. I considered how to answer. The full truth would sound insane to fresh ears. Delta 7 has unique conditions. The company keeps us out here because the oil's worth it, but they know the risks. That's why they rotate most people out after 3 months. Daniel, who hadn't spoken since introducing himself, suddenly fixed his eyes on me. Why did you stay for 5 years? His voice was soft, but each word was precisely articulated. The question hung in the air. Tyler and Kevin turned to me, suddenly interested in my answer. Someone has to know the rules, I said simply. Someone has to be here to teach them. Daniel nodded, his pale eyes never leaving my face. I felt that prickle at my neck again. So what happens if we break these rules? Tyler asked, still not taking them seriously, but at least engaging. Depends which one, I replied. The eastern railing after dark? You might find yourself wanting to climb over. Hurricanes? Whatever's outside might find its way in. Ignoring your instincts? I shrugged. That's how we lose people. Kevin crossed his arms again. I've worked Gulf rigs for 12 years. Never needed special rules before. Then you've been lucky, I said. But luck runs out on Delta 7. I collected the laminated sheet, watching their faces. I'd given this same talk many times before. I could almost categorize the responses now. The scoffers, the nervous believers, and the quiet ones who might go either way. Tyler would likely test the boundaries until something scared him straight. Kevin was dangerous, the kind who thought experience elsewhere made him immune to Delta 7's peculiarities. And Daniel. I couldn't get a read on Daniel yet, which concerned me more than outright disbelief. Orientation with Captain Peterson starts in 15 minutes, I said, standing up. After that, I'll show you to your quarters and your workstations. As they filed out, I watched them go with the weight of certainty in my gut. I'd seen dozens of new workers come through that door. Some listened. Some learned the hard way. Some never got the chance to learn at all. And looking at these three, Tyler with his camera already pointing toward the eastern side, Kevin with his dismissive confidence, and Daniel with his unnerving stillness, I knew at least one of them wouldn't make it through their first month. I finished typing the last few notes on my shift report, glancing at the clock on the control room wall, just past 7:30 in the evening. The sun had slipped below the horizon about 20 minutes ago, painting the sky in fading oranges before surrendering to darkness. Through the windows, I could see lights flickering on across the western side of platform Delta 7. Crew members moving between stations, wrapping up the day shift. I saved the report and pushed back from the desk, rolling my shoulders to work out the stiffness. 5 years on this rig had taught me to never let my guard down, especially after dark. The night shift crew was filing in, exchanging brief updates with day workers heading to the mess hall for dinner. As I stood to leave, movement on one of the external monitors caught my eye, a figure walking along the outer deck, heading east. I leaned closer to the screen, squinting to make out who it was. The build, the walk, the phone held up like a camera. Tyler Brooks. Damn it, I muttered, grabbing my jacket from the back of the chair. I rushed out of the control room, pushing past 2 engineers discussing a maintenance schedule. The corridor led to a set of heavy doors opening onto the main deck. Outside, the wind had picked up, carrying the smell of salt and metal. "Tyler," I called, but my voice was swept away by the wind and the constant mechanical hum of the rig. He was already at the far end of the deck, phone held high, the bright beam of its flashlight cutting through the darkness as he approached the eastern railing. The very railing I'd explicitly warned him to avoid after sunset. I broke into a run, boots clanging against the metal walkway. The eastern side of Delta 7 was now completely dark, facing away from the remaining work lights and into the vast emptiness of the Gulf at night. "Tyler, stop right there!" I shouted, loud enough this time to carry over the wind. He didn't turn. Instead, he leaned further over the railing, pointing his phone down toward the water. The distance between us was closing, but not fast enough. I watched as his body language shifted, his shoulders stiffening, his movement becoming unnaturally still. When I was about 15 feet away, I saw what the beam of his flashlight was illuminating, and my stomach knotted. The water below the eastern railing wasn't moving. The Gulf of Mexico is never still. Not completely. But what lay beneath Tyler looked like black glass, a perfect mirror reflecting his light. And beneath that glassy surface, shapes moved, not like fish or natural sea life, but like long, jointed limbs reaching upward. "Holy shit," Tyler was saying as I approached. "Are those—" He stopped mid-sentence. His phone slipped from his hand, tumbling end over end until it hit the water with a distant splash. The light disappeared beneath the surface, swallowed by whatever waited below. Tyler didn't react to losing his phone. He just stood there, rigid and unmoving, staring down at the water. His hands gripped the railing, knuckles white with tension. I reached him just as he began to lift one leg, sliding it over the railing. "No, you don't," I growled, grabbing his shoulder and yanking him backward with all my strength. We both tumbled onto the deck, the metal grating digging into my back as Tyler landed half on top of me. For a moment, he was completely limp. Then he blinked rapidly, shaking his head like someone waking from a deep sleep. "Marcus?" he asked, confusion clear in his voice as he sat up. "What are we doing outside?" I got to my feet and hauled him up by his arm. "We're leaving. Now." Tyler looked around, disoriented. Why am I on the eastern side? Weren't we just at orientation? I didn't answer, just pulled him along the deck toward the western half of the rig. His feet stumbled at first, then found their rhythm. When we reached the safety of the work lights, I stopped and faced him. "What's the last thing you remember?" I asked. Tyler ran a hand through his hair, looking genuinely lost. Walking back to my quarters after meeting the captain. I wanted to set up my stuff before dinner." His eyes widened suddenly. "Wait, where's my phone?" "It's gone," I said flatly. "You dropped it in the water." "What? When did I—" He patted his pockets frantically, as if the phone might magically appear. Then he looked back toward the eastern railing, still visible as a dark outline against the night sky. "I don't remember going out there at all." I watched his face as realization slowly dawned. His hands were shaking now, and not just from the wind chill. "You were about to climb over," I said. "If I hadn't been in the control room and seen you on the monitor—" Tyler's face went pale. "But I wouldn't— I'm not suicidal or anything." "It's not about being suicidal," I explained, keeping my voice calm despite the residual adrenaline pumping through me. "It's about what's on the eastern side after dark. That pull you felt, that's why the rule exists." Tyler glanced back toward the darkness again. There was something in the water. I saw— He stopped, struggling to find words. It wasn't moving right, and there were these shapes. I nodded. "The eastern water changes at night. What did it look like to you?" "Like black glass," he said quietly. "And underneath, something was reaching up." He shuddered. "But that's impossible, right? Water can't just stop moving. On this rig, impossible things happen all the time," I said. That's why we have the rules. They're not suggestions or superstitions. Tyler wasn't arguing anymore. He kept looking at his empty hand where his phone should have been, then back toward the eastern side. "Come on," I said, gesturing toward the interior doors. "Let's get you inside." As we walked, I glanced back once more. From this distance, the water below the eastern railing looked normal again, choppy waves reflecting the few lights that reached that far. No one would believe anything had been wrong if they looked now. That was part of the problem with Delta 7. The danger rarely left evidence. We reached the main corridor, and I could feel Tyler's tension easing as the doors closed behind us, cutting off the view of the deck. "The worst part is," Tyler started, then paused, looking embarrassed. "What?" "Part of me still wants to go back out there," he admitted. "Like, I know what almost happened. I know it was bad. But there's this voice in my head saying I need to see it again." I'd heard this before from others who'd had eastern side encounters. "That feeling will fade after a day or two," I assured him. "But until it does, stay on the western side, and maybe buddy up with someone when you're moving around the rig." Tyler nodded, his earlier skepticism completely gone. "I think I'll skip dinner and just go to my quarters." "Bad idea," I countered. "Being alone with those thoughts isn't good right now. Food and company will help ground you." He didn't argue, just nodded again. We walked in silence toward the mess hall, passing crew members who had no idea what had just happened, or how close we'd come to losing someone on their first day. As we reached the mess hall doors, Tyler stopped. "Thanks for pulling me back," he said quietly. "I'm sorry I laughed at the rules earlier." "You're not the first," I replied. "Most people need to see something for themselves before they believe. You just got lucky I saw you in time." Tyler went inside, heading toward the food line with unsteady steps. I stayed by the door for a moment, watching him. He'd be okay now, but the experience would stick with him. In a way, that was good. He'd respect the rules going forward, maybe even warn others. I thought about Kevin, with his dismissive attitude, and Daniel, with his unnerving stillness. They hadn't learned their lesson yet. I wondered which of Delta 7's rules they would test first, and whether anyone would be there to pull them back when they did. The mess hall was already half empty when I arrived for breakfast the next morning. Most of the crew had eaten early and moved on to their shifts, leaving behind the smell of coffee and the clatter of kitchen staff clearing dishes. I spotted Tyler immediately, sitting alone at a table near the far wall, hunched over a full plate of scrambled eggs and toast. He hadn't taken a single bite. I grabbed a coffee and made my way over to him. His eyes flicked up as I approached, then returned to staring at his untouched food. Dark circles hung beneath his eyes, and his usual energy had vanished completely. "Mind if I join you?" I asked, though I was already pulling out the chair across from him. Tyler gave a small nod, pushing his tray a few inches away. "Not hungry." I took a sip of my coffee, studying him. "Rough night?" "Didn't sleep much," he admitted, his voice low and strained. "Every time I closed my eyes, I saw myself walking into that water, the glass-like surface, those things underneath." He rubbed his face with both hands. "It felt so real. And the worst part is, I keep wanting to go back there. Like right now, part of me is thinking about how I could sneak out to the eastern railing again." I'd seen this before with others who'd had eastern side encounters. "That's normal after an exposure," I told him. "The eastern side leaves a pull on people. It's why the rule exists in the first place. It's not just about what's out there, it's about how it affects you afterward." "How long does it last?" Tyler asked, finally looking up at me properly. "Different for everyone. A few days, usually. Some people feel it for weeks." I leaned forward. "That's why you need to stay away from that side completely, day or night, until the feeling passes." The overhead speakers crackled to life, and Captain Peterson's voice filled the mess hall. "Attention all personnel. This is Captain Peterson. The meteorological team has updated their forecast for Hurricane Delilah. The storm has changed course and accelerated. We expect it to make contact with the platform by 2000 hours today. All non-essential crew need to secure their stations and begin lockdown procedures by 1600 hours. Storm briefing for all hands in the main conference room at 1300 hours. That is all. The few remaining crew members in the mess hall exchanged glances. Hurricanes weren't uncommon in the Gulf, but the accelerated timeline meant we had less preparation time than standard protocol allowed. Great, Tyler muttered. First the railing incident, now a hurricane. Some first assignment. Just stick to the rules and you'll be fine, I said, though a knot of concern was forming in my stomach. Hurricane nights were always tense on Delta 7. Movement from the corner of the room caught my eye. Daniel Walsh sat alone at a small table, methodically bringing his fork from plate to mouth at perfectly timed intervals. His back was straight, his posture unnaturally rigid. Not once did he look up from his plate or pause in his eating rhythm. "What's his deal anyway?" Tyler asked, following my gaze. "He hasn't spoken 2 words to anyone since we arrived." "Some people take time to adjust to rig life," I said, though my gut told me there was more to it than that. I stood up, coffee in hand. "I need to check the evacuation protocols before the briefing. Try to eat something, okay? Long day ahead." Tyler nodded half-heartedly, pushing his eggs around with his fork. I walked toward the exit, deliberately taking a path that would bring me past Daniel's table. As I approached, I caught a glimpse of his breakfast. My steps faltered. Daniel's plate contained what should have been scrambled eggs, but they weren't the same as what was on Tyler's tray. These were slick and gelatinous, practically clear in places, completely raw. Yet Daniel continued eating them with the same mechanical precision, chewing each bite thoroughly before swallowing. He must have felt me watching because his head turned slightly in my direction. I quickly averted my gaze and kept walking. But not before I noticed his eyes, flat and expressionless, like painted glass. In the corridor outside the mess hall, I nearly collided with Kevin Miller, who was heading in as I was heading out. "Watch it, Rodriguez," he said, stepping around me. "Any word on when we're getting off this rust bucket? Company should be sending evac choppers if there's a hurricane coming." "No evacuation," I said. "We ride out storms here unless they hit Category 5. Platform's built for it." Kevin rolled his eyes. "So we're stuck inside all day listening to the wind? Great. I've worked through plenty of storms before. No reason we can't keep operations going with proper safety measures." "Delta 7 hurricanes are different," I emphasized, remembering the second rule I'd explained yesterday. "When the lockdown starts, everyone stays in the designated areas. No exceptions." Yeah. I remember your ghost stories," Kevin said with a dismissive wave. "Don't worry about me. I know how to handle myself." He pushed past me into the mess hall before I could respond. Through the closing door, I saw him heading straight for the coffee station, pointedly ignoring both Tyler and Daniel. The wind outside was already picking up, whistling through the metal framework of the platform. I could feel the earliest vibrations of the storm through the floor beneath my boots. Weather sensors on the outer pylons would be registering the changing pressure, the increasing wave heights. A sense of unease settled over me that had nothing to do with the approaching hurricane. I'd been through plenty of storms on Delta 7, enough to know the standard procedures. But something about this one felt different. Maybe it was Tyler's vulnerability after his Eastern Side experience, or Kevin's dangerous overconfidence, or the strange way Daniel Walsh moved and behaved. Whatever it was, my gut told me this storm was going to test everyone's commitment to the rules. And on Platform Delta 7, breaking the rules usually meant someone didn't live to regret it. The wind picked up steadily throughout the afternoon, rattling the platform's metal framework with increasing intensity. By 7 in the evening, waves were already crashing against the lower support structures, sending vibrations through the entire rig. Hurricane Delilah was arriving ahead of schedule. I stood in the doorway of the main shelter room, checking names off my clipboard as crew members filed in. The shelter was the largest enclosed space on Delta 7, reinforced specifically for storms like this. Steel-plated walls, backup generators, emergency supplies, standard hurricane protocol for Gulf rigs. Everyone gets accounted for, I reminded each person entering. No one leaves until the all clear, no exceptions. Tyler Brooks entered, looking pale and distracted. His experience at the eastern railing had clearly left its mark. He glanced at me and gave a small nod before finding a seat against the far wall. "How many more?" Captain Peterson asked, approaching me with a tablet showing the storm's projected path. "Still missing 8 crew members," I answered, scanning the list. "Engineering team is coming up from below, and—" I checked again to be sure. Kevin Miller hasn't checked in yet. Peterson frowned. "Miller was supposed to be securing equipment on the west platform an hour ago." "I'll try his radio," I said, unclipping the device from my belt. Before I could make the call, Kevin appeared at the end of the corridor, strolling toward us with unhurried steps despite the increasing sway of the platform. "Miller," Peterson called out, "cutting it close. Get inside." Kevin walked past us into the shelter, making a show of checking his watch. "Still got an hour before it hits, Captain. Your weather team's been wrong all day." I bit back a response and continued checking off arrivals. Kevin had been nothing but dismissive since orientation, but I had more important things to worry about than his attitude. By 8:30, all 43 crew members were accounted for. I secured the main door and double-checked the seals while Peterson addressed the room. "Hurricane Delilah's outer bands are already hitting us," he announced over the howl of the wind outside. "Current projections put the eye wall reaching us around 2100 hours. We stay locked down until the all clear. Emergency protocols are in effect." I moved through the room, distributing water and checking that everyone had what they needed for the night. Many of the veteran crew members had already settled in with books or card games, knowing from experience that storm lockdowns could last 12 hours or more. Daniel Walsh sat alone in a corner, hands folded neatly in his lap, staring straight ahead at nothing in particular. Unlike the other newcomers who looked nervous or bored, Daniel's face remained utterly blank. Not scared, not impatient, just empty. The storm intensified faster than expected. By 9 o'clock, Delilah was hitting us full force. The shelter room lights flickered twice before stabilizing, and a low, creaking sound spread through the walls as the platform adjusted to the powerful winds and waves. "That's Delta 7's song," one of the veteran engineers commented to a nervous-looking maintenance worker. "She can take worse than this." I knew he was right about the platform's structural integrity. The real dangers during hurricanes on Delta 7 had nothing to do with wind or waves. Kevin Miller stood up suddenly from his seat, walking toward the equipment lockers near the door. "Where are you going?" I asked, moving to intercept him. "Saw a loose cable on the west deck connector when I was coming in," he said, pulling out a rain jacket and hard hat. "It was flapping around, probably going to tear free in this wind." "It'll have to wait until morning," I told him firmly. "No one goes outside during the storm." Kevin zipped up the jacket, ignoring me. "It's connected to the communications array. If it tears loose, it could damage the whole system." Captain Peterson approached us, having overheard the conversation. "That's a negative, Miller. Whatever it is can be repaired after the hurricane passes." "With all due respect, Captain, I've worked through Category 3 hurricanes before," Kevin replied, his tone making it clear he felt his experience trumped our concerns. "Quick trip out and back, 10 minutes tops." "This isn't about the hurricane," I said, lowering my voice. "Remember the rules I told you about? Never leave shelter during storms, no matter what?" Kevin rolled his eyes. "Right, because of the spooky ghosts that call your name." He looked at Peterson. "Captain, I know what I'm doing. That cable could save us thousands in repairs and keep communications online." Several crew members were watching now. I could see the veterans exchanging knowing glances. They'd seen what happened when people broke the rules. "Miller, I'm ordering you to stand down." Peterson said, his voice hard with authority. For a moment, I thought Kevin would listen. Then he grabbed a flashlight from the locker and a coil of safety cable. "I'll be back in 10 minutes, he said. "If I'm not, then you can say, 'I told you so.'" Before either of us could stop him, Kevin punched the emergency override on the door panel. The heavy steel door unlocked with a loud click. Wind immediately howled through the opening as Kevin slipped outside, pulling the door shut behind him. "Stubborn idiot," Peterson muttered, turning to me. "Rodriguez, log the violation. We'll deal with disciplinary action after the storm." I nodded, but my stomach tightened with dread. Disciplinary action wouldn't matter, not for Kevin. Several of us moved to the reinforced windows that looked out over the main deck. Through sheets of rain, we could see the beam of Kevin's flashlight bouncing as he made his way across the platform, hunched against the wind. "He's heading for the communications tower," one of the techs noted, pointing to where the beam was moving. The flashlight progressed steadily across the deck for about a minute. Then abruptly it stopped moving. We watched, waiting for the light to continue its journey. It didn't. Kevin's flashlight remained fixed in one spot, the beam pointing outward into the storm. No movement, no progress toward the supposed loose cable. "What's he doing?" Tyler asked, having joined us at the window. "I don't know," I answered honestly. For several minutes the light remained stationary. Then, without warning, it winked out completely. Peterson immediately grabbed the radio. "Miller, report. Miller, do you copy?" Only static answered. I tried my own radio. "Kevin, this is Marcus. Do you need assistance? Over." More static, punctuated by the storm's interference. "Could his radio be damaged by the rain?" Tyler asked, his voice tight with worry. "They're waterproof," I replied. "Standard issue for offshore work." Captain Peterson turned to me. "Rodriguez, your call. Emergency response protocol?" I knew what he was asking. Delta 7 had special procedures for situations like this, different from standard offshore rescue protocols. On a normal rig, we'd form a rescue team with safety lines and go after him. But this wasn't a normal rig. "No rescue attempt during the storm," I said, looking Peterson directly in the eyes. "We stick to the shelter protocol until daylight." Peterson nodded grimly. Several newer crew members looked shocked, but the veterans remained silent, understanding the choice. "He could be injured out there," a young engineer protested. "If he is, going after him puts more people at risk," Peterson responded firmly. "Decisions made." I kept watching the spot where Kevin's light had gone out, straining to see anything through the rain and darkness. Nothing moved on the deck. 20 minutes passed with all of us on edge, speculating about what might have happened to Kevin. Then the intercom system crackled to life. "This is Kevin Miller," came a voice through the speakers. "I've secured the cable and returned to the north entrance. Request permission to enter." The voice was Kevin's, same tone, same inflection. But I could still see the empty deck where his flashlight had gone out. There was no one at the north entrance. "Captain," I said quietly, pointing out the window. "There's no one there." Peterson stared at the empty deck, then at the intercom. His face hardened with understanding. "Miller, identify your location," he responded through the comm system. "I'm at the north entrance," Kevin's voice repeated, exactly the same as before. "Request permission to enter." "That doesn't sound right," Tyler whispered beside me. He was correct. The phrasing was perfect, but there was something mechanical about it, like a recording being played back. "Maintain lockdown," Peterson ordered, addressing the room. "No one approaches the doors for any reason." The intercom crackled again. "This is Kevin Miller. I've secured the cable and returned to the north entrance. It's cold out here. Request permission to enter." Same words, same inflection, with just those two additional words in the middle. Something cold slithered down my spine. "What the hell is going on?" one of the newer crew members asked, looking between the intercom and the empty deck outside. I met Peterson's gaze, and he gave me a slight nod. The veterans knew not to speak of these things directly. It only made them worse. But the new crew needed some explanation. "It's not Kevin," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Whatever's using the intercom, it's not him." "But that's his voice," Tyler argued, though I could see the fear in his eyes. "That's Rule 2, I reminded him. "Never leave shelter during hurricanes, no matter what you hear outside or who seems to be calling for help." The intercom activated again. "This is Kevin Miller. Please, let me in. I'm injured and need medical attention." The voice was still Kevin's, but the delivery was different now. Urgent, pained. If I hadn't been looking at the empty deck with my own eyes, it might have been convincing. "Everyone away from the doors and windows," Peterson ordered. "Find something to occupy yourselves. This could go on for a while." Most of the crew moved back toward the center of the shelter, forming small groups and speaking in hushed tones. The veterans started card games or opened books, deliberately ignoring the intercom. They'd been through this before. Tyler stayed by my side at the window. "So, what happened to him?" he asked quietly. "I don't know exactly," I admitted. "No one does. That's why we have the rules." For the next 2 hours, Kevin's voice continued to come through the intercom system at irregular intervals, sometimes pleading, sometimes angry, sometimes simply repeating the same phrases. Each time I checked the deck, still empty, still no sign of Kevin Miller. "Please, I can see you through the window," the voice said at one point. "I know you're in there. Just open the door. I'm freezing out here." Tyler flinched beside me. "It knows we're watching." "It's trying to manipulate us," I corrected him. "Don't engage with it. Don't even acknowledge it." Around midnight, the intercom went silent. The hurricane continued to rage outside, but the voice stopped calling to us. I wasn't relieved. Sometimes the silence was worse than the voice. The hours crept by slowly. Some crew members managed to sleep on cots or chairs. Others kept anxious vigils by the equipment, monitoring the platform's systems as the storm battered us. I didn't sleep at all, keeping watch by the window and checking the other sealed entrances periodically. Daniel Walsh remained in his corner throughout the night, never sleeping, barely moving. Once, when I looked in his direction, I found him staring directly at me with those empty eyes. He held my gaze for several uncomfortable seconds before looking away. By 5 a.m, the storm had begun to weaken. The winds were still strong, but the violent rocking of the platform had subsided. At 6, the meteorological team confirmed that Hurricane Delilah had passed us, moving northeast and away from the rig. "All department heads, prepare for damage assessment," Peterson announced. "We'll begin inspection teams once the all-clear is given." At 6:30, with the first gray light of dawn breaking through the clouds, Peterson gave the order to unlock the shelter. I volunteered for the first exterior inspection team, along with 2 senior maintenance workers. "I'm coming too," Tyler said, stepping forward. "I want to help find Kevin." I considered refusing, but the determination in his eyes changed my mind. Maybe he needed this, to face whatever was out there rather than hiding from it. "Stay close to me," I told him. "Do exactly as I say." We geared up with radios and emergency kits, then unlocked the main door. The air outside was cold and damp, heavy with salt spray. Debris was scattered across the deck, broken equipment, torn metal sheeting, plastic containers from the storage areas. Our small team moved carefully across the platform, documenting damage and checking critical systems. The western section had weathered the storm relatively well. The communications array, where Kevin had claimed to see a loose cable, was intact with no signs of damage. There wasn't anything wrong here, one of the maintenance workers noted, inspecting the connections. "All cables secure." I nodded, unsurprised. "Let's check the north and east sections." The north entrance, where the voice had claimed Kevin was waiting, showed no signs that anyone had been there during the storm. No footprints in the metal grating, no equipment left behind. As we approached the eastern side, I felt Tyler tense beside me. "Are you okay with this?" I asked him. He swallowed hard, but nodded. It's daylight now, and we need to find him. The eastern section had taken the brunt of the hurricane. Railings were bent, equipment cases torn open, safety netting shredded by the wind. We carefully made our way along the damaged walkway, checking each area. That's when we saw him. Kevin's body was wedged against the eastern railing, partially hidden behind a fallen equipment cabinet. He was soaked through, his rain jacket torn in several places. But it was the position of his body that made Tyler gasp beside me. Kevin's limbs were bent at angles that weren't physically possible. His right arm twisted behind his back, and then forward again, like it had been broken in multiple places and rearranged. His legs were similarly contorted, one bent backward at the knee, the other twisted in a spiral. His face was the worst part, frozen in an expression of such complete terror that it barely looked human anymore. His eyes were wide open, bloodshot and bulging. His mouth stretched in a silent scream, jaw extended far beyond what should have been possible. "Jesus," whispered one of the maintenance workers, turning away. Tyler retched beside me, doubling over and gripping the nearest intact railing for support. I'd seen deaths on Delta 7 before, but nothing quite like this. I forced myself to approach the body, keying my radio as I did. "Captain, this is Rodriguez. We found Miller on the eastern platform. He's deceased. We'll need a recovery team and the medical officer." "Understood." Peterson's voice came back. "Secure the area. I'll send the team." I turned to the maintenance workers. "Get Tyler back to the shelter. I'll stay with the body until the recovery team arrives." They nodded gratefully, helping Tyler stand and leading him away from the gruesome scene. Once they were gone, I crouched near Kevin's body, careful not to touch anything. There were no obvious wounds, no signs of impact trauma that would explain the impossible contortions of his limbs. It was as if something had grabbed him and twisted, using force no human could survive. I looked out at the eastern waters, now relatively calm in the post-hurricane morning. The same waters that had nearly claimed Tyler 2 days ago. The same waters we warned everyone to stay away from after dark. Kevin Miller had broken the rules, and Delta 7 had claimed another victim. I wondered what he'd seen in his final moments to cause such terror. Part of me was glad I didn't know. The recovery team would be here soon. They'd zip Kevin into a body bag, take him to cold storage, and begin the paperwork for an offshore fatality. The official report would blame the hurricane, an unfortunate accident during a severe storm. But everyone on Delta 7 would know the truth. The rules existed for a reason, and Kevin Miller had just become another example of why. 3 hours after finding Kevin's body, my hands still felt cold, not from the Gulf air or the morning drizzle, but from what I'd seen. That impossible contortion, that face locked in terror. The medical team had documented everything before we'd begun the cleanup process, but the image stayed with me, burned into my memory like an overexposed photograph. I supervised as 4 crew members carefully lifted Kevin's remains onto a stretcher. The body bag couldn't fully close because of the strange angles of his limbs. That detail bothered me more than it should have. "We need more restraining straps," I called out, grabbing extra ones from the emergency kit. As I turned back, I noticed Daniel Walsh stepping forward from where he'd been lingering at the edge of our recovery operation. "I can help," he said, his voice flat and measured. "I have experience with deceased individuals." Something about the phrasing made my skin crawl. Not bodies or even the dead, but deceased individuals, like he was reading from a manual. Before I could respond, Daniel had already taken the straps from my hands, his movements precise and efficient. "Thank you for your assistance," I said, watching him closely. This was the 3rd time Daniel had inserted himself into the recovery operation, first volunteering to help locate the body when additional search teams formed, then offering to collect Kevin's scattered personal effects. Now this. Daniel worked methodically, securing the straps with practiced ease. When the others looked away to gather the remaining equipment, I saw him pause. He leaned down toward the partially open body bag, his nose nearly touching Kevin's cold skin, and took a long, deliberate inhale. He was smelling the body. I nearly called him out right there, but years on Delta 7 had taught me caution. Whatever Daniel was, whatever was wrong with him, confronting him directly might not be the wisest move. He straightened up, seemingly satisfied with whatever information he'd gathered from that grotesque sniff. His eyes met mine across the stretcher, and I pretended to be checking the strap tension, hoping he hadn't noticed me watching. "The body should be properly secured now," Daniel announced to no one in particular. "We'll take it from here," I said, gesturing for the regular medical team to continue. As we finished the recovery operation, I kept Daniel in my peripheral vision. His movements were too precise, almost robotic. He never wasted motion, never showed discomfort around the corpse like the others did. And unlike everyone else on the team, he hadn't asked a single question about how Kevin died. Back at the main platform, Captain Peterson had called an emergency briefing for all personnel. The storm damage needed immediate attention, and the crew needed information about Kevin's death, the official version at least. The conference room filled quickly. 41 crew members now, with Kevin gone. Daniel slipped in last, taking a position near the back wall where he stood perfectly straight, hands at his sides. Tyler sat in the front row, still looking pale and shaken from this morning's discovery. Peterson stood at the front, his face grim. As most of you know by now, we lost a crew member during the hurricane. Kevin Miller left shelter against direct orders and protocol. His body was recovered this morning on the eastern platform. A murmur went through the room. The veterans exchanged knowing glances, while newer crew members looked confused or frightened. "The official cause of death will be listed as storm-related injuries," Peterson continued. "Company investigators will arrive once weather permits helicopter transport, likely in 2 days. Until then, we need to document everything according to protocol and get this platform back to full operational status." He outlined damage reports from each section and assigned repair priorities. The briefing was almost finished when Daniel raised his hand. Peterson nodded in his direction. "What are the protocols for preserving the body?" Daniel asked. His voice carried clearly through the room. "At what temperature is it being stored to minimize decomposition? And has anyone documented the progression of rigor mortis or initial tissue breakdown?" The room went silent. Even Peterson looked taken aback by the questions. "The medical officer is handling all appropriate procedures," Peterson answered carefully. "That's not information relevant to general crew." "I disagree," Daniel said, his tone matter of fact. "Understanding decomposition rates in high humidity, high salt environments could be valuable knowledge for future incidents. The bacterial colonization sequence alone could—" "That's enough, Walsh," Peterson cut him off firmly. "See me after the briefing if you have specific concerns about medical protocols." I studied Daniel as Peterson wrapped up the meeting. His skin looked different today, paler than yesterday with an almost waxy quality. Around his jaw and neck, the skin seemed to sit wrong, like a shirt one size too large. When he turned his head to look around the room, the skin shifted a half-second behind the movement of his skull. As the crew filed out to begin their assignments, I caught Tyler's eye and nodded toward a quiet corner. He understood and drifted in that direction while I made my way over casually. "How are you holding up?" I asked once we were alone. Tyler ran a hand through his hair. "Not great. First the eastern side thing, then the hurricane, now Kevin." He trailed off, looking at the floor. "This place is exactly the nightmare you warned us about." I lowered my voice. "Have you noticed anything strange about Daniel?" Tyler's head snapped up, eyes suddenly alert. "You noticed too?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper. "Tell me what you've seen," I said. Tyler glanced around to make sure no one was within earshot. He doesn't blink, like, ever. I watched him for 20 minutes straight during the storm lockdown, and his eyes never closed once. That aligned with my observations. "Anything else?" Tyler hesitated. Last night, before the storm, I got hungry and went to the kitchen to grab a snack. Daniel was there, standing in front of the open freezer. He had his back to me, but I could see he was eating something raw. At first, I thought it was like, I don't know, frozen cookie dough or something. But it wasn't, I prompted. No. When he turned slightly, I saw it was meat. A frozen steak, still in the packaging. He was taking bites right through the plastic. When he noticed me, he just stared. Didn't say anything, didn't look embarrassed. Just stared until I backed out of the kitchen. I felt a cold weight settling in my stomach. The third rule existed for exactly this reason. Crew members who didn't act right, who showed patterns of behavior that weren't human. Daniel walked past the conference room door at that moment, pausing briefly to look in our direction. His hand was wrapped around a coffee mug, and as he lifted it to his mouth, I noticed his fingernails. The undersides weren't dirty. They were black with something that looked organic, almost like mulch or wet soil. He continued down the corridor, his movements too smooth, too measured. "Stay away from him," I told Tyler. "Don't confront him. Don't question him. Don't get caught alone with him." "What is he?" Tyler asked, genuine fear in his voice. "I don't know exactly," I admitted, "but he's not Daniel Walsh. Maybe he never was." "What do we do?" "I need to talk to Peterson, quietly. We've dealt with situations before on Delta 7. I put my hand on Tyler's shoulder. "Just keep your distance for now, and keep watching. If you notice anything else, come directly to me." Tyler nodded, his face a mix of fear and resolve. "Do you think he had something to do with Kevin?" "I don't know," I said honestly, "but my gut says he's dangerous. And on this rig..." "We trust our instincts," Tyler finished for me, showing he'd finally taken the rules to heart. As Tyler walked away, I leaned against the wall, mentally reviewing everything I knew about Daniel Walsh. The too perfect movements, the strange speech patterns, the interest in Kevin's corpse, the physical changes happening to his skin and nails. We had something inhuman on Delta 7, disguised as a crew member. The realization made my blood run cold. I needed to act quickly before whatever was pretending to be Daniel realized we suspected him, and before we found out what he really wanted. Rule 3 existed for a reason, and now I understood just how important it was going to be. After my conversation with Tyler, I didn't waste time. I headed straight for Captain Peterson's office, my boots clanging against the metal stairs as I took them 2 at a time. The image of Daniel sniffing Kevin's corpse kept playing in my mind, along with Tyler's account of finding him eating frozen meat through the plastic packaging. Something was very wrong with Daniel Walsh, if that was even his real name. I knocked on the captain's door and entered when I heard his gruff, "Come in." Peterson sat behind his desk working through damage reports from the hurricane. Dark circles under his eyes told me he hadn't slept much since the storm. "Rodriguez," he nodded. "What's the status on the recovery operation?" "Complete, sir. Medical has Kevin's body in cold storage." I closed the door behind me and lowered my voice. "But that's not why I'm here." Peterson looked up, his attention fully on me now. "What's going on?" "It's about Daniel Walsh." I explained everything. The unnatural movements, the lack of blinking, the waxy skin that seemed to sit wrong on his face, the raw meat eating, the disturbing interest in Kevin's corpse. As I talked, Peterson's expression grew increasingly grim. "You're certain about this?" he asked when I finished. "As certain as I can be without direct proof. Tyler Brooks has noticed the same things. Something isn't right with him." Peterson rubbed his jaw, thinking. "We've had similar situations before. Not exactly like this, but..." "Rule 3, I said. "Trust your instincts about other crew members and report unusual behavior." "Right." Peterson stood up. "We need to handle this carefully. If Walsh is something else, Confronting him in a public area could put the entire crew at risk. We agreed to approach Daniel in the equipment storage room on the lower level. It was isolated enough to minimize danger to others, but close to communication points if we needed backup. Peterson checked his watch. According to the duty roster, Walsh should be doing inventory in storage room B right now. "I'll get him there," I offered. "I can say we need to account for storm-damaged equipment." Peterson nodded. "I'll meet you there in 10 minutes. And Rodriguez?" He opened his desk drawer and pulled out a heavy flashlight. "Be careful. If your instincts are right, we don't know what we're dealing with." I headed down to the main deck, checking my radio to make sure it was working. The rig felt different today, quieter, tenser. Crew members moved with purpose, focusing on storm repairs, but there was an undercurrent of unease following Kevin's death that hung in the air like the lingering humidity. I didn't see Daniel anywhere on the main deck or the mess hall. As I passed the medical bay, Dr. Patel waved me over. "Rodriguez, good timing. Can you sign off on these body transfer forms for Miller?" I stepped into the small medical office, glancing around as I took the clipboard. "Everything's secure in here?" "As much as it can be after a hurricane," Patel replied, "though someone accessed the cold storage unit last night without logging it. The seal was broken this morning." My hand froze over the paperwork. "The unit with Kevin's body?" Patel nodded. "Nothing seems disturbed, but protocols require a report. Who has access besides medical staff?" "Just senior personnel and safety, so you, the captain, chief engineer." Patel trailed off, noticing my expression. "Is there a problem?" "No," I said, signing the form quickly. "Just follow up with extra security on that unit, okay?" I left the medical bay with an even stronger sense of urgency. Someone had accessed Kevin's body during the night. Given Daniel's strange interest in the corpse, I had little doubt who it might have been. I found Daniel exactly where the roster said he'd be, in equipment storage room B, clipboard in hand, methodically checking inventory. When I entered, he turned his head with that same too smooth motion I'd noticed before. "Marcus Rodriguez," he said, voice flat. "Do you require assistance with equipment?" "Actually, yes," I replied, keeping my tone casual. "Captain wants a full accounting of storm-damaged safety gear. Thought you could help me gather it all in storage room D for assessment." Daniel made a slight nod. "I can assist with this task." We walked together through the narrow corridor that connected the storage areas. I stayed slightly behind him, watching his movements. His shoulders didn't sway as he walked. His arms hung perfectly still at his sides. Every few steps, I noticed a slight ripple under the collar of his jumpsuit, as if the skin on his neck was shifting independently of his movement. Storage room D was larger and more isolated than the other storage areas. It housed emergency equipment, life rafts, survival gear, flares, and backup communications devices. As we entered, I casually positioned myself between Daniel and the door. "What specific equipment requires assessment?" Daniel asked, still facing away from me. "Captain will let us know. He's meeting us here." Daniel went still. Completely, unnaturally still. Not even the subtle rise and fall of breathing disturbed his silhouette. The door opened behind me and Peterson stepped in, closing it firmly. "Walsh," he said, his voice carrying the authority of command. "We need to talk." Daniel didn't turn around. He remained facing the wall, his clipboard still held at exactly the same angle. "Daniel Walsh," Peterson repeated, louder this time. "Turn around." Slowly, with that mechanical precision I'd come to recognize, Daniel turned. His face was completely blank. Not just emotionless, but literally blank, as if someone had erased all his features. Where there should have been expressions of confusion or concern, there was nothing, no reaction at all. Peterson took an involuntary step back. What the hell? I moved toward the emergency equipment rack on the wall, my eyes never leaving Daniel. My hand found the flare gun mounted there and I quietly unhooked it. Then Daniel's face began to change. The skin around his cheeks started to slide downward like melting wax dripping off a candle. His eyelids stretched and sagged. The flesh of his forehead slipped down over his eyebrows in thick folds. Beneath the slipping skin, I saw gray bone, not white like normal human bone, but a dark, ashen gray that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. "Captain, get back," I warned, raising the flare gun. The thing that had been pretending to be Daniel tilted its head at an impossible angle. The skin of its face sloughed off completely, revealing a skull with hollow black eye sockets. No eyes, no tissue, just empty darkness within the orbital cavities. "What are you?" Peterson demanded, his voice remarkably steady despite the horror before us. The skull's jaw moved up and down, but no words came out, only a clicking sound like bones tapping together. Then it attacked. The creature lunged at Peterson with speed no human could match. One moment it was standing 10 feet away, the next its bone hands were around the captain's throat. Peterson gasped, trying to break free, but the skeletal fingers only tightened. I aimed the flare gun and fired. The red flare struck the creature directly in its exposed rib cage. Instead of passing through, it lodged between the ribs and ignited, filling the storage room with blinding crimson light and thick smoke. The creature released Peterson and made a sound I'll never forget, like metal grinding against metal, amplified and distorted. It clawed at its chest, trying to extract the burning flare. Peterson stumbled backward, coughing and clutching his throat. I grabbed his arm and pulled him toward the door, keeping the creature in my sight. The flare continued to burn between its ribs, illuminating the hollow cavity of its chest from within. There were no organs, no blood, just empty space within the cage of gray bones. As we watched, the creature's remaining skin, the jumpsuit, the hair, everything that had made it look like Daniel Walsh, began to dissolve. Not burning, but simply collapsing, as if whatever force had been animating it had disappeared. The empty human disguise crumpled to the floor like a discarded suit, leaving only the skeleton standing. The grinding sound increased in pitch until it was almost a scream. The bones began to crack, hairline fractures spreading across their surface. The skull split down the center. The rib cage collapsed inward. Within seconds, the entire skeleton crumbled into a pile of ash-gray dust on top of the empty skin suit. The flare sputtered out, leaving us in the dim emergency lighting of the storage room. "Jesus Christ," Peterson whispered, still massaging his throat where bruises were already forming. I approached the pile cautiously, keeping the empty flare gun raised. Nothing moved. Whatever the creature had been, it was gone now. "What the hell was that thing?" Peterson asked. "I don't know," I answered honestly, "but it wasn't human. Never was." We stood in silence for a moment, processing what we'd just witnessed. Then Peterson's training took over. "We need to contain this, get rid of whatever that is, and figure out what to tell the crew." He was right. Panic wouldn't help anyone, and we had no idea if this was an isolated incident or part of something bigger. We found a metal container in the storage room and carefully scooped the dust and empty skin into it. Neither of us wanted to touch the remains directly. The skin felt wrong, too light, as if it had no substance at all, like touching smoke that had somehow taken solid form. Peterson radioed the engineering team and ordered them to fire up the incinerator, citing contaminated materials as the reason. 20 minutes later, we watched as the metal container disappeared into the flames. The remains burned quickly, with an unusual blue-green tint to the fire that neither of us mentioned. Back in Peterson's office, we struggled to make sense of what had happened. "How long do you think it was on the rig?" Peterson asked, pouring himself a drink from the small cabinet behind his desk. His hand trembled slightly. "I don't know. The real Daniel Walsh might never have set foot on Delta 7. I declined the offered glass. That thing could have replaced him anywhere. During transit. at the mainland facility, maybe even earlier. And now we have to tell the crew something, Peterson said. They need to know Walsh is gone. We agreed on a simplified version of the truth. We would say Daniel Walsh had been affected by the same phenomenon that had claimed Kevin, that he'd shown signs of unusual behavior and turned hostile when confronted. The emergency had been contained, but Daniel hadn't survived. It wasn't a complete lie, just an incomplete truth. Peterson called an emergency meeting in the mess hall. By then, word had already spread that something had happened in the storage area. The crew gathered quickly, faces tense with questions. Peterson explained the situation as we'd agreed, emphasizing that the danger had passed but reinforcing the importance of following the platform rules. As he spoke, I watched the crew's reactions. The veterans nodded grimly, unsurprised. They'd seen enough on Delta 7 to accept the unexplainable. The newer crew members looked scared, confused, but no one challenged the captain's account. From now on, Peterson concluded, we double down on the buddy system. No one works alone, especially in isolated areas. Report any unusual behavior immediately, no matter how small it seems. Understood? A chorus of, "Yes, sir," echoed through the mess hall. As the meeting broke up, Tyler approached me. It was Daniel, wasn't it? He asked quietly. What we talked about earlier. You were right. I nodded. He wasn't what he appeared to be. Tyler looked around at the rig, at the crew members dispersing to their duties. Now I get it, he said. Why you've stayed on this hellhole for 5 years when most people rotate out after 3 months. Someone who knows what's out there needs to be here. To protect people like me who show up not believing the rules. His words hit me hard because they were true. I'd stayed because I knew the danger, knew how to spot the warning signs, knew which rules mattered most and why. Someone had to. The rules exist for a reason, I told him. Not because we like making people's lives difficult, but because we've learned what happens when they're broken. I believe you now, Tyler said, after everything I've seen. Later that evening, I stood on the western deck, looking out at the Gulf waters. The sun was setting, turning the horizon orange and red. In the distance, I could see another oil platform, a normal one, where the only dangers were practical, physical things, machinery, weather, human error. Here on Delta 7, we faced those dangers too. But we also faced things that couldn't be explained in incident reports or safety manuals. Things that wore human faces but weren't human at all. Things that waded in the water, called through the storm, or walked among us disguised as colleagues. I'd been on Delta 7 for 5 years now. I'd seen crew members die because they broke the rules. I'd seen others survive because they listened. And today, I'd seen something that shouldn't exist at all. A creature of bone that had been pretending to be human. Just another day on platform Delta 7, where following the rules meant the difference between going home and becoming another cautionary tale.